Cabbage.com. I'm here to do a Facebook Live. I'm trying to do it weekly. And what I have for you today is how to ferment vegetables. It's one of my favorite things to do in the height of summer season, where I'm receiving a ton of vegetables from my CSA, which is Community Supported Agriculture Local Farm. If any of you have not heard of a CSA before, I highly recommend doing a search for them, because it is the absolute best way to get fresh, local, organic produce right in your own backyard. Many places, depending on where you live, will have a farm that you can actually go to. If you live in cities, I believe they do various drop-offs for people where you can order it ahead of time and someone from the farm will come and deliver your share of vegetables. It is a wonderful, wonderful, inexpensive way to get a ton of produce delivered right to you, or you can go to a farm and get the farm experience. I just went and got my share yesterday, and I just get a small share because I used to get a larger share, but now that my girls are kind of like, some of them are out of the house, and I'm finding that I'm not needing quite as many vegetables. But for about $17 a week, you can get a large amount of vegetables. I get 7 pounds, plus I get different choices of tomatoes. I get to go out and pick my own raspberries if they're in season, strawberries, cherry tomatoes, plum tomatoes, string beans. So there's many different types of vegetables that you can get from this CSA farm share. So I wanted to let you all know that because of the nature of how I'm going to be doing this Facebook Live today, I'm not going to be able to answer questions as we go along, but I'll do my best to go back and look at the comments that are out there today and answer them at a later time. So as you're going to see, my hands are going to be really dirty soon. Well, dirty, they're going to be filled with salt and vegetables soon. So it's going to be difficult to go to my computer and try to answer questions at the same time. I hope you'll forgive me and you'll understand. So one of my favorite vegetables to ferment is cabbage. And you all probably know fermented cabbage as sauerkraut, right? I believe it's a German staple to have sauerkraut in one's diet. And as I have traveled around the world and done different research, it seems that most different cultures have some sort of fermented vegetable that they like to use as a staple in your diet. For example, in Korea, Korean folks like to use kimchi, which is basically a spicier version of regular sauerkraut, and it could be mixed with things like onions and garlic and ginger and carrots. So lots of different spices can go in there as well. For today's sake, we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to do sauerkraut, but we're going to add a little bit of a twist there, and we're going to add some turmeric, so that we get to put in a bunch of anti-inflammatory factors. As you all know, the thing that's in turmeric, the compound in turmeric that helps it be very anti-inflammatory, is curcumin. So curcumin's a great anti-inflammatory component that is found as a main ingredient or compound in our turmeric. So as you see, I am cutting up some cabbage. I cut it up sort of finely, but I don't want to do it too fine because I prefer the crunch, the nice crunch that I have, that I like in sauerkraut. So if you cut it up too finely, it'll get a little too soggy. I'm having a hard time looking at the camera, making eye contact with you all, and try to use a sharp knife. So I'm going to err on the side of caution. Excuse me if I'm not making eye contact. We'll save my fingers in the meantime. So we're cutting this up, and what we're going to be doing is adding it to a large bowl. As I'm putting it into the bowl, I want to make sure there's not any super hard pieces. And if there are some hard pieces, those are the ones you want to cut a little more finely. Otherwise, those will be maybe too crunchy when you're done with the sauerkraut. And I do like to try to break it up a little bit. Ooh, see that go flying? Just to be able to separate it so that it's easier to massage once we get going. So, all right, I'm gonna put this aside for now for time's sake, and I will get back to that later. So here you go, I've got my bowl of cabbage that is sliced up nicely. There might be some pieces that are a little bit too big, so maybe I'll just take them out as I go along. So again, you wanna try to separate them. So the Italian in me is not very good at measuring when I do this, but I will do my best to guesstimate as to how much I use as far as salt goes. So this type of fermentation is going to allow for the growth of good bacteria, which, as we all know and we spend a lot of money on, is probiotics. So this is sort of a natural way to be able to get, and a less expensive way to get probiotics into your body. Probiotic supplements are wonderful if you don't have time to make fermented food or if you don't enjoy the taste of fermented food, but it's always my favorite way to try to get probiotics into people because the array, the variety of probiotics that are found in fermented vegetables is so much more than you'll ever find in any probiotic that's out there. One thing I failed to mention before we started is that I always use organic produce, and I do not wash the produce before I start cutting it up. And you might say, oh no, but that's not good. So I remember reading years ago about all the bacteria that reside on the organic vegetables. And when we're fermenting the vegetables, we want to keep that bacteria present so that we can foster the growth of good bacteria. And how we do that is by using, you can use sea salt, Celtic salt, pink Himalayan salt. The only pink Himalayan salt I had today was the kind that you grind up, and I felt like I'd be grinding for an awfully long time. So today I'm just using regular sea salt. But this process of fermentation is called lactofermentation. So basically what we're going to be doing is adding salt into the cabbage to be able to discourage the growth of bad bacteria or pathogenic bacteria and encourage the growth of good bacteria. So the salt allows that to happen. And during the fermentation process, so I have about a whole cabbage, maybe like 3/4 of a cabbage. And so that's probably, if I had to measure cups here, I would probably say I've got about 6 cups of cabbage, okay? So with 6 cups of cabbage, I'm gonna start off with doing 1 tablespoon of salt. And I'll taste it in a little while to see if that's enough or too much. Hopefully it won't be too much. So I always try to err on the side of caution because you can always add more, but you can never take away, right, with salt. So the key to fermenting at least cabbage, it depends on what kind of vegetable it is. I'll discuss some other vegetables after I do this. But the key with cabbage is to massage it. If you've ever massaged kale and made like a massaged kale salad, it's the same type of concept where we really want to work on, breaking down the cell walls to allow the salt to soften the vegetables, to be able to use the process of osmosis. So what we're trying to do is create a brine. And how we're creating a brine is by encouraging the water that is inside of the cabbage to be drawn out into where the salt is. So if you remember from good old chemistry class, that osmosis, basically going from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So we want to bring the salt to go from, or I'm sorry, the liquid to go from inside the cabbage to my salt solution that I'm creating here. And it's pretty cool. If you massage this for long enough, we actually, I'll show you in a little while, we'll create a little bit of a sponge-like solution. So I'm gonna, in a little while, I'm gonna squeeze this cabbage and you'll actually see liquid coming out of it. So it's quite cool. And I'll show you my little cheat at the end if you end up not having enough time to really massage the vegetables to create that brine solution. I'll show you in a little while. You can always add a little bit of water afterwards because you do want the cabbage, once it's fermenting, or once it's in the jar and going to be waiting to ferment, you really want it to be in a solution of salt water. So I know some people use different starters for this. To me, this is the easiest and most inexpensive way to ferment vegetables. So let's see, I'm gonna give it a little squeeze. You probably can't see in the video, but I've got some water coming out. So that means I'm doing a pretty good job. Okay. I'm also going to give it a quick taste because I don't want it to be, I want it to be enough salt, so. It's good. I've done this enough times and I know like how salty it's supposed to taste. And believe it or not, it's supposed to be pretty salty, and I wouldn't worry too much about salt intake. If you want to look in more detail about salt, we have a lot of different articles on our website about when you use good salt, that it's actually an essential nutrient to us, and how not to fear it, and how it's not always the blame for high blood pressure as it has once been thought to be. So this is looking pretty good and pretty ready. So what I'm going to do now is add in a little bit of the turmeric. And it's going to make it this really pretty color. So how much turmeric am I adding in? Half a teaspoon. Again, not really good at measuring. But look at how beautiful it is now. I don't know if you can see that. So we're going to place it in its vessel to be able to sit and ferment. So I'm going to add all this just into a mason jar. And people do this various different ways. Okay, so as you see, it does not have a ton of water in it right now. So I probably could have gone a little bit more as far as the massage goes. It can take quite a bit of time. And then sometimes, you know, some cabbage has less water in it than others. So I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat. I'm going to take this water and I'm going to add it. Bubble, bubble, bubble. Get all the air bubbles out. And as you can see, I put enough water in so that the cabbage is covered. And I push it down like this. I really like how to get it underwater, okay? So the idea is during the fermentation process is that we want the carbon dioxide, I started saying before, I think I interrupted myself. So the salt allows for the fermentation of the carbohydrates that are found in the cabbage to be able to ferment to carbon dioxide and good bacteria, okay? So carbon dioxide is given up. We don't want to trap the carbon dioxide in here. We want the carbon dioxide to be released. And meanwhile, we really don't want any oxygen, as much oxygen as possible to keep it out of here during the fermentation process. If too much gets in, it can get mold and you just want to be careful. So I do this little cut of like a yogurt top. And I know plastic's not the most ideal. There are other things you can buy online. I've never invested in them. But if you see, I put that lid right on top. And I kind of push it down. And then I take, oops, here's my jar. Let me grab a little water. Then I take a jar that can fit inside and I put a little bit of water on it. And basically this acts as my weight. See that? And I push it down and I make sure that there's no cabbage that's above the water line. So you're gonna let it sit on the counter. Depending on the temperature, this time of day, or this time of year, we're still in a warmer temperature range. So today's a little bit cooler here in Maine. But for the most part, in the summertime, it usually takes about 3 days. In the wintertime, it can take 7 to 10. So it really depends on how warm your house is. If you're running an air conditioner all summer long, it might take longer as well. So I leave this on the counter for 3 to 10 days, depending on the time of year. And every day I'll walk by it, and I call it burping it. I'll just give it a little bit of burp. I push down on it, get the air bubbles up, make sure that carbon dioxide isn't getting trapped down in there. And then I would say after 3 days, I'll open it up, give it a little taste. You want it to be tart, and you want to just make sure there's no mold growing on it. If you ever see any mold growing on it, from what I've heard from one of the biggest fermenting experts out there, that if it's all one color mold, just scoop it off. There's nothing to worry about. If you see different colored molds, not a good idea. That means your batch has gone bad. But don't be afraid of a tiny bit. If it's all the same, uniform in color, scoop it off. Do a really good job at, skimming it, taking a spoon, skimming it off the edge, and then you're good to go. So in this particular fermented vegetable, we massaged. If I am shredding something like carrots or beets, I do the massage. If I'm making pickles, which is also a really cool thing to do, I do not massage. What I would do is I would make the salt solution, swish it around, water, salt, put it in a jar like this. I'd cut up my cucumbers. I'd add things like garlic, and I'd add in maybe some dill and some peppercorns and some mustard seeds. And you do the same thing where you want to keep the cover on it and make sure that it's not exposed to air. Sometimes even if I've got a full jar and I know that there's not going to be any air involved, I'll just take a cap to the mason jar and just put it on there. I've seen people do that. And as I've said before, and I'll try to provide a link for you, on Amazon or at your local farmer supply store or natural food store, you might be able to find these lids that actually don't allow oxygen to go in, but allow for the carbon dioxide to come out. So those might be a really good investment. Like I said, I've never invested. I kind of do the old school method myself, but feel free to search for that. It could be an easy step for you, and especially if you're just learning and you don't want to create any errors. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed my demonstration today on how to ferment vegetables. And please, if you have any questions, say so on here, and I will be happy to get back to you soon. Or feel free to email me, nutrition@drjockers.com, and I'll be happy to answer your questions there. Happy Friday and have a great weekend, everyone. Goodbye.